based on a book which our guest, thank you, Sophie, for joining us, which is written and got long-listed for the Booker Prize. Before we begin this conversation, I would just wish to set a context. Many of us, while growing up, I'm sure would have had this commandments from your parents or your parental figures: don't do this or don't do that. And I'm sure many of us have experienced it. I had a younger cousin of mine who, in her early teens, until she became independent, started questioning her parents and said, all throughout my life, I've heard only what I should not be doing, and I'm totally ignorant of what I should be doing. And she said, I'm a victim of helicopter parenting. You've been hovering around, all throughout my life. And I think a lot of shades of over parenting or helicopter parenting is what gets reflected while I read this book, because everyone would have a different reading experience. But what I've observed, and I wish to, because there's totally a different domain. I teach commerce at a university, but after having started reading Sophie's book, I found it so very compelling that I could finish it in probably in 2 or 3 days. Because that was the way in which the language, the narrative was quite very interesting. Coming to this book, safety is a small price to pay for a better world, but is it? Is a question which Sophie raises in this book. Is it a small price? And at what cost do we seek purity, control, and survival? I think these are the three profound questions which is interwoven in the entire fabric of what she has written. And that's across gender, even though the narrative is from three women's perspectives. By the way, how many of you, just a quick show of hands, how many of you have already read this book? We'll take the first question, and I'll also try to attempt giving you a gist of this book so that you will be able to better appreciate the conversation. So, it's a world which Sophie creates, which is both alien and frighteningly, it is also familiar to us. The context which Sophie is setting is something which happens in our family, something which happens in our office space, something which might even happen among countries. So today, we have the privilege of Sophie, the author, being with us. And the first question that I wish to ask on the book, The Water Cure, which presents a kind of a dystopian world where toxicity is both physical and it is also psychological, a kind of a threat. So, how did you conceptualize this, chilling at the same time, quite an evocative narrative? How did you get this idea of writing this book?
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, first of all. And yeah, it's my first visit to Kerala, and I'm really thrilled to be part of the festival. And thank you so much for interviewing me, and thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, for the water cure, I think first of all, I'm really interested in the idea more generally. I've come to realize, kind of 3 books in, about I guess making things that are quite intangible, but that feel very impactful to us, kind of trying to conceptualize those things physically. And the idea for the book originally came about in a kind of more, a more traditional sense. I was thinking about eco-crisis, I was thinking about sisterhood. So the kind of the first draft of The Water Cure was actually totally different, and it was set in a flooded world. It was set on an oil rig, so it had a completely different setting. And as I was working on the draft, I came to realize that it wasn't necessarily the flooded world or the oil rig that was interesting to me. It was the idea of sisterly bonds in an isolated environment. And I knew that there was some kind of catastrophe that had isolated them from the world, but I was trying to figure out what that was. And then as I was writing the novel, I was kind of writing it a lot in mainly wrote it in 2016, 2017. And I think in 2016, it was a time when I feel like there were quite a few shifts. There was obviously Donald Trump's first rise to power and the Brexit vote in the UK too. And also a lot of Me Too stories being shared, that being a movement that was taking place. It kind of all collectively felt like, there was a lot of, shifting, a lot of sort of toxicity, I guess, in the atmosphere, to forgive me for being so literal. But as that was kind of taking place, and I was thinking about the psychological impact of that, it made me think about, what if toxic masculinity was literally toxic, almost as a kind of just as an idea. And then it kind of made me realize that was actually what I had been searching for in the novel, and that was the disaster of the novel. So working from that idea, an idea of a literally toxic kind of patriarchy, masculinity, and being able to conceptualize that physically, so not so abstractly. So women are literally getting sick. They're not just, dealing with the kind of trauma or, kind of a low level existing in the world. Is literally manifests as an illness, and that kind of developed then from there.
Okay. Since it becomes easier for us to appreciate this conversation if we know the real context of the story, with Sophie's permission, I thought of giving you a gist of what this novel is all about. So the water cure, which we are discussing today, is a haunting for me, and a thought-provoking debut novel, which weaves a dystopian, feminist, and psychological elements into the deeply unsettling narrative. It's set in an ambiguous post-apocalyptic world where there are three sisters, Grace, Leah, and Sky. They live in isolation on an unnamed island. Their father, King, and mother have built a sanctuary to protect them from a toxic and dangerous external world, one in which men's violence and mysterious environmental sickness dominate. I don't know if it was COVID. The family follows a very strict rituals and purification ceremonies to protect themselves from the supposed dangers of the outside world. The sisters have been taught to fear strangers and view their father's methods as necessary for survival. However, their carefully controlled existence is disrupted when King all of a sudden disappears and a group of men, James, Liu, and Will, arrives on the island. The arrival of the men triggers a kind of a seismic shift in the sisters' lives. For much of the Leah, the middle sister, the entire novel is anchored around as a narrative of Leah. She begins to experience emotional and even physical desires that contrast sharply with the lessons that were instilled by her parents. As tensions mount, long buried truths about their family, their isolation, and the outside world are revealed, forcing the sisters to confront their fears about relationships and the fragility of the world that they thought they knew. Now, that's the basic premise of the novel. If I didn't want to give the entire context and the climax, but the novel crescendos into an ambiguous and shocking climax, leaving the reader questioning the reliability of the narrative and the true nature of the dangers the sisters face, which are both external and internal. But one thing which is common across her narrative is feminism. And again, my second question is, how did feminism become the central theme of this novel, and how does the story reflect on the contemporary gender politics? What message do you hope the readers take away about these power dynamics?
It's funny because when I was writing the book, I wasn't kind of necessarily thinking of it specifically as even given the topic as a kind of a feminist novel necessarily, but it was the idea of a family and the structure. They are completely at the mercy of their father king, who kind of rules their small world with an iron grip. And like you said, there are these rituals that they undergo, these kind of systems of purification, systems designed to kind of help them control their emotions and control their bodies as well. But it was one of those things that, as I wrote it, and the dynamics of the family grew, I was thinking more about the nuances within that as well, about, it's not as simple as the father is the one who is completely in control and kind of, I guess, visiting this violence on them and telling them lies about the world. The mother is also, as a character, like very complicit and very invested in kind of holding up the rules of this world. It's strange because in the novel itself as well, I really believe that the father king, that these cures and these rules, they are designed to protect the girls. He's not actually, well, maybe at the start as well, it was specifically, but they're not designed to be harmful to them. He really believes that they are curing them and that he is keeping them safe from a world outside that, like you said, is very dangerous, a world outside where women are very sick and women are dying, and sort of seeing it through the angle of, the kindness of the family, but how when a family is in isolation, when any kind of system is in isolation, that kindness can be warped and it can become a kind of control. So that was kind of that evolution of the dynamic for me, but also thinking of it as coming from a place of kind of love and of concern and well-being, of like genuinely thinking that you're doing the best for your family. And like you said earlier at the start, that kind of idea of how much do we, when it comes to safety, like how much do we kind of give for safety, or what is safety, and is the price of safety sometimes too high in the context of this community and this family? Is the price of safety too high? For sure, all these cures, this isolation, where the line is drawn, I suppose.
So it's not just feminism that one would find, of course, that's something which is anchored on, but there is also, as Sophie had rightly mentioned, the toxicity, the concept of purity, trauma and survival, isolation versus connection. There are sort of a lot of complex ambiguity and uncertainty. A lot of things gets captured in this whole narrative. Now, what interested me is, I had a kind of a self-imposed isolation uh, at a point in my life when I went through a divorce. And when I was going through it, I had my choices. I knew what I should be doing and what I should not be doing. But in reality, there are also instances where a lot of things are imposed by others. When I say others, it includes your parents, by the societal expectations, sometimes even the institutions or the government. It could be anyone on which you don't have a control. I think that's where this narrative becomes quite interesting. Self imposed kind of discipline, at the same time, on which you have a lot of choice. But there are external impositions as well. So how the sisters in this book are also kind of caught between two, right? So how did you shape that context, and what made you contextualize such a scenario of internal and external impositions that comes to you?
the cures in the novel, so they're like the kind of cures and rituals that they inflict upon themselves, often centered on water. They're things like breathing exercises, but also they play a game, for example, where they wear a special dress called the drowning dress, and it has weights in it, and then they have to stay under the water for as long as they can. All these kind of elements which are about testing the body and about kind of controlling the emotions. And I had the idea because I was reading about Victorian water cures and reading about how they used to send female hysterics to the spa and essentially actually inflict water cures on them. So they might be bathed in water, cold water, or it was probably, they weren't as sort of as cruel therapies as in the book. I went quite imaginative with my, my conceptualization of the rituals. But it was really interesting to think about, I guess, this historical context of women who are, again, hysterical, too emotional, sent away for these cures, which are designed to make them physically and mentally more docile. It was quite a strange idea, but at the same time, there was also what you said about the kind of, the self-inflicted versus the externally inflicted. I think for the girls, there's kind of a comfort in the idea of, you do this ritual, you perform this task, you do this routine, and you will be kept safe. I think this echoes to, contemporary wellness culture as well. The idea, if you do this, your body will be perfect. If you do this, you'll feel better. If you just do this, if you follow these steps, you will somehow be like perfect. This kind of purification. So I could kind of understand it in the girls because, sometimes I have a lot of feelings and I think, well, I wish I could do a breathing exercise and feel better. I wish, if there was a simple to, to externalize feelings, to have some kind of rituals for coping with the world. But of course, in the novel, it's taken to kind of the extreme, and it's used as a tool to really repress the emotions of the girls and to really stop them from, I guess, being themselves and stop them from questioning the very real emotions and the very real questions they have about their entire existence and about the systems that they've been raised in.
And one more thing which I found quite interesting is the non-linear nature of your narrative. So there are a lot of things, I would say it's very filmy or very cinematic in its narrative. You have it's easy to do in a film because you could do the edits and plays to context of the past, the memories. But you've beautifully blended both memories and the present and what it goes through three women. Everything is well portrayed. So was this novel written with an intention of probably even in the long run someone getting inspired and converting it into a movie, or do you had, or it just came out and as a story and wrote it? Because it's not easy to write such a non-linear, it's not easy to make such a non-linear storytelling.
I think I'm really drawn to like a non-linear form. I think I love a fragment. I kind of love. I'm very visual as a writer, essentially, and so for me, I do see the scenes in kind of terms of images. I'm very bad at the whole. And then I walk down the stairs and then I brush my teeth, kind of thing. I want to kind of skip ahead to the next bit. So for me, like a non-linear kind of fragmentary narrative essentially like holds my attention as a writer. But I think also for the girls especially as well, I wanted in this novel to have that sense of, time is kind of everywhere. It functions differently on the island to how it functions everywhere else, I think. It's like this one long, dreamy day. They have their routines, but it's kind of a procession of strange images over and over until the men arrive, and then that kind of snaps it into a more recognizable, I think, narrative, and purely because something's sort of happening and something is taking place, and sort of snapping them out of their dreamy dailiness, I suppose. But yeah, in terms of like filmic kind of aspect. Again, it's the thing of being quite a visual writer. Like I really sort of see it in my head as a film almost. It feels like transcribing a film in a strange way. But I was kind of recently, adapting it for screen. I was writing on a script, and it was really interesting to revisit the novel and to, having sort of seen it as a film in my head, to then think about how would you actually translate it to the screen. And it's actually like a novel where there's so much that is unsaid and so much that happens off the page, and not a lot of dialogue. It was actually quite difficult. So I'm like, it feels like it should be a film, but at the same time, it's like quite difficult to translate it to a script.
So is it like you do multiple edits or it just goes in a flow? How does that writing process happen? I mean, I'm just trying to understand more of you as a writer.
Yeah.
What's your writing style? How do you conceive, and you do multiple edits in your
I'm
your
like
writing?
very, very messy as a writer. I always think I'm a writer who needs to try. Like I hear from a lot of writers who kind of just write it perfectly the first time, and I really wish I was that kind of writer, but I am not. I'm very much a redrafter. I think you have to sort of try a lot of things out in a novel, and for me, I think I'm a sketcher really. Like I'll kind of start with an outline, and then as I spend more time with the story, I'll do more and more drafts, and then I'll realize something isn't working, and I'll change that. But I find the process really comforting. Because it's quite a fast process. I probably write my first drafts in like 6 to 8 weeks even, but then I will go over and over and over it. So I think I wrote the first draft of my current novel like 3 years ago, and I've only just finished it because I've just been rewriting, and sometimes I've left it for a bit, and then so me writing really is rewriting, but I kind of learned to love the process of doing that.
Okay. And many interpret this novel as a response to the Me Too movement. Was it intentional, or is there any context to that?
I think it wasn't like explicitly as a response, but that was kind of, I guess, the atmosphere that I was writing it in. That was kind of what was on my mind a lot at the time. I would feel like I would log on to social media and I would see people's testimonies, and it was so important to see them. And at the same time, you can't, like, reading that stuff all day long and sort of thinking about as well how these elements have shaped your own life and shaped the life of so many people as well. It became quite like, it felt very profound, and it also felt quite exhausting. And then that was the idea of, like, we're all feeling impacted by this, like it's something that we can't escape from. It's on social media, something maybe we've always kind of lived with, but now it's being spoken about more than ever before. And so that's the idea of thinking of it in terms of having like a physical manifestation too, in the sense of being like a literal illness that can be spread around, that people can suffer from.
Okay. So one more thing which I was attempting to contextualize after reading this is in the positioning it in the current socio-political context, where there is isolation and control. When I say isolation and control, in the geopolitical strategies of certain countries, isolating themselves economically or politically to safeguard their sovereignty, which is exactly what you had portrayed. Now, today, there's a lot of talk about making America great again. Probably that's one context in which you can look at it. There's also context of safety and versus freedom. When I say safety and freedom, the sisters growing up in a controlled environment, suppressing their autonomy. In the same way, in today's world, how the governments balance the trade-off between ensuring national security and preserving citizens' freedom. I mean, there is a lot of context you can actually place in this novel. Similarly, authoritarianism and manipulation. The controlling figures in a family could be parental figures in the novel, and they use fear, they use rituals to enforce obedience. And what happens in a geopolitical context is the rise of authoritarian regimes which often manipulate societal fears such as terrorism or migration. There's a constant othering or a fear that is created, which is helping the leaders to establish their authority. Then there are a lot of ways. Trauma and collective memory is another one. The trauma of, in a geopolitical context of colonization, of war. So many ways in which you can, fix this. Most importantly, another thing which I've found is the toxicity and how she has placed it within the family. Um, I must say that, or I just wanted you to give your opinion about whether toxicity is gender specific. I wish to share one of my colleagues' experience as well, on which probably you can have a longer conversation. In my university, or rather in another context, one of my colleagues went and asked our HUD if he could get leave since his wife was expecting, and the due date for delivery was almost near. And the comment, despite being a woman, was, you should have planned it for Christmas vacation. Now, this is something which we never expect from someone in position, despite being a woman. So I believe it's not the gender; it's sometimes the power which corrupts. As we say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. What is your take on that? Because you place it in the context of feminism and several other related concepts. What's your opinion on that?
No, I completely agree. I think, one of the misconceptions that, something I really hope people don't take from the book is, that it's like anti-men and that all men are evil. Like gender is so much more nuanced than that. The world is so much more nuanced than that. And I believe, that it's about the power, isn't it? And it's like patriarchy is something that hurts everyone. Like really, like the kind of, it hurts just everyone, because like I said, there's this toxic masculinity which leads to people feeling they can't express themselves. There's violence. There is a whole like spectrum of ways it inflicts harm on everyone. This doesn't feel like, obviously there are winners, but at the same time, like there should not, most people are harmed by it in some degree. And I think it is that power, which we see it as well, with Mother, like I said, kind of providing that nuanced picture of someone who's very complicit in that structure, who's complicit in upholding this system that she actually does fairly well in, like getting to sort of be the queen of this small world. So yeah, I totally agree with you. It's more about power and the kind of corruption that can lead to in a small unit, not even a small unit, a large unit, but one that is relatively enclosed, whether that's a family or, like you said, a country.
Okay, to understand more of you as a writer, in your writing, I find that the line of realism and surrealism actually blurs. And what are the kind of readers, what are the kind of writers, what kind of books, authors have inspired you? Do you also read similar kind of novels or writings? What made you place this very thin line of difference between realism and surrealism?
I kind of read everything. I really believe that, I don't want to just read books that are like my books, or I'm kind of interested in a really broad like spectrum of literature, and I think that's the best way to be really open to every kind of book, and to be constantly reading widely and like reading outside of your comfort zone, or just reading things you might not like even think to read. And I admire so many books that are very different to mine, because I just feel like I could never write like that. There's so many, novels which are just really great, kind of realist novels. I'm even thinking like, for example, Sally Rooney, and just creating these very nuanced, tender portraits of people we're like, there's nothing kind of strange happening at all. There's no surrealism or anything in there. But I'm like, I could never do that, but I'm still kind of captivated. And so I think for me, I just really love in my own writing, because it is a kind of process of, hopefully when it's going well, of joy and of fun and play. And for me, what I like to write is these worlds where something is a little different, where something is kind of off kilter, where it kind of veers between reality and a kind of surrealism, elements that are kind of dreamlike. I want the reader to feel disoriented, and I really enjoy approaching, I guess, elements that are very recognizable to us and issues that are recognizable to us in our world, but by taking that kind of surreal or off-kilter approach, and whether that means, setting the novel in a speculative world that I've totally invented, or keeping kind of details of time and place ambiguous, or ambiguity more generally as well. Having these kind of elements where we're not totally sure how firm the ground that we are on as readers is, I find that just a really useful way into exploring these issues that we kind of think about all the time in a way that feels new to me. Especially so in the water cure, that idea of, again, like kind of conceptualizing these things that we recognize, this patriarchy, as an actual illness. Sort of, you see it differently, but you also have a bit more leeway of how to play with it and how to, I guess, make the abstract tangible. And I just find that very creatively useful, I suppose.
So, as a Welsh writer, how much of the cultural background, how much of your personal experiences, or maybe some incidents in your personal or professional journey has influenced or triggered something which made you write this? Has there been any sort of personal experiences or any sort of cultural influences? Probably the books that you've read, or the traditions that you're part of, which has influenced the way you look at the world, the way you write?
In terms, actually, yes, I did answer about authors. In terms of authors, I really love, there's one author, Joy Williams, who's an American author. He mainly is known for short stories, and his stories are just so strange and kind of quite unlike anything. Well, when I first read them, they were quite unlike anything I'd read before. I really like authors who I feel are doing something quite different, or something that, when you kind of read something and you feel a little bit like you've had electric shock, you feel very awake suddenly, or you feel like you're reading something which feels very new to you, something which kind of changes your viewpoint, I suppose, on what language could do. I'm sorry, I got too excited to talk about Joy Williams. I forgot the rest of the question. What was the rest of the question, sorry? It was...
how much of your personal experiences?
Oh yeah, personal experience. I think as a novelist, it's really hard to not bring in personal experience as well. But it's all, my novels are all very fictionalized, and I'm definitely kind of drawing on feelings or experiences, but in a way that is not necessarily like recognizable. I think for me to kind of have that emotional center, there has to be elements that are coming from my experience, elements that are coming from, like my thoughts and ideas and events of my life. But even to me, sometimes it's not immediately kind of recognizable in how they're manifesting. I kind of think of writing as a form of psychoanalysis, because sometimes I'll read the novel back and I'll be like, okay, well, clearly that's from that event that was happening then, or this happening then. It's definitely, there is so much elements of me, but I think probably not recognizable to anyone who's not me. Although my mum was very much like, is the mum me? And I'm like, it's fine, it's not you.
So I understand that Blue Ticket or Cursed Bread, those were your subsequent works after the water cure. Is there any recurring motive or themes that a reader could find in these books that you've written later?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's always an unreliable narrator. I'm just very drawn to a narrator who we can't trust, to someone who's going to tell the story in a way that we're never fully sure if we're getting the true story. I think as well, I've realised, kind of 4 books in, 3 books, but I've got one coming out next year. Desire is just really integral to the experience of all my novels. Whether it's in Blue Ticket, it was desire for a child. In The Water Cure, it's kind of a desire, like an awakening of desire in terms of like romance. In Cursed Bread, it's a desire, again, like kind of for romance and for intimacy, but also for a different kind of life, to have lived a different kind of way. And so I think, create this sense of wanting is really central to my novels. It kind of is the propeller, I guess, this central question of wanting to be transformed, wanting something different, wanting to, kind of be more than what is currently on offer. And I think, in The Water Cure, we see it with the girls, not just in Leah's kind of relationship with Claire, or one of the men, but also in the sense that like this kind of hunger for elsewhere, this knowledge that there has to be more than this world, which is kind of conflicting with their desire, this kind of the sense of how do you leave a place of safety? How do you leave a place that has been told your whole life that is the only safe place, but also this longing for more, which they, Leah doesn't even fully kind of grasp it. I think just that sense of, forward momentum.
And how do you hope your work contributes this ongoing conversations about gender, about trauma, about power, not just in literature, but even beyond? What ways do you think does it contribute to these kind of discourses?
I just hope that people kind of enjoy the stories and that they feel, I guess, somewhat like recognized. That's what I most hope for, I think, when it comes to writing, is that, my novels really speak to someone, that they feel recognized, or that they feel kind of somehow changed, or like it's really been an experience they needed, I suppose. That was kind of the thing I would most hope for, and in this context as well, I think.
While I was reading, I was also trying to understand how this fits into the corporate culture. There too, I find parallels, a lot of parallels, like isolation and control. A lot of bosses try this with their subordinates, toxic environments, rituals in conformity in terms of the corporate culture, and the ambiguity in leadership without giving a clear direction as to what is expected of the subordinates. There's a lot of ways you could interpret this, and unreliable narrative, because the story is narrated from the point of view of a lady, but her narrative itself lacks clarity. I mean, that's the brilliance of the writing. And that lack of clarity is something which you would experience for those. We have worked in the corporates. Lack of clarity brings in such a context of authority imposing their power. So, did you have that context in mind? Did you have that geopolitical context in mind, or was it just that happens within a family?
I think kind of like with that, what we spoke about earlier about that idea of sometimes you don't really know something's in it until you've done it. Like, I wasn't specifically thinking about it, but I love that interpretation. I also love that, that people have those interpretations, and that it is a story that lends itself to those kind of interpretations. I'm a real fan of ambiguity in writing, and I suppose like giving the reader room to form their own conclusions. And I think of it as kind of showing trust in the reader, and reading feels like I'm not just sort of writing in isolation. I want the kind of act of someone reading my work to be kind of a distant collaborative effort with me. I want, when the book is out of my hands and it's with a reader, like they're having a totally different experience. And I think there's room for lots of different experiences and interpretations. My agent talks sometimes about something she calls fruitful ambiguity, which she always applies to my work. These kind of leaving of gaps that people can fill in with fill in the spaces themselves, and I guess, almost put it together like a puzzle. And I think it can be a bit frustrating because there is definitely a balance to be struck in this kind of ambiguity. You know, like how much do we tell the reader? How much should we leave up to the reader to interpret before it gets kind of just a bit annoying? And we don't want to like lose faith as well in the writer for doing this. We want to believe that they still know everything that's going on. And I think because it was my first novel too, sometimes I worry I didn't get the balance quite right, but I also still stand by my ambiguity in the book.
Thank you. I think we had committed 40 minutes of a dialogue, and then we thought we'll open it for the audience. Now it's time for audience, if there are any questions to the author about any of the topics that we had discussed, about her writing experience, anything, it's open for the audience. Any questions? I think, okay, there's one there.
Hi, ma'am. Why did you think of three girls? Because ladies are less privileged. Can't your characters be boys?
I'm sorry, can you
Can't
repeat
your
the question?
characters be boys? Why did you choose three girls? Why didn't you go with...
I was very interested in sisters, and I think there's something about that bond between sisters that's so primal and so loving, but also they can kind of hurt each other in a way that nobody else can. And they've also grown up together on this island, and they haven't known anything of the outside world. But they've kind of had very different experiences of their life on the island. So we get the perspective of the older sister and also the middle sister. Mainly we get the perspective of the middle sister, but we also get the perspective of the older sister later on in the novel, which kind of really recontextualizes what we've been told by the middle sister. And we also get sections where all three of the sisters speak together as one in a chorus. So we kind of then see the collective experience too. And yeah, so exploring kind of these bonds which are so close and the experience they have which is so close, the spaces themselves, and I guess almost put it together like a puzzle. And I think it can be a bit frustrating because there is definitely a balance to be struck in this kind of ambiguity. You know, like how much do we tell the reader? How much should we leave up to the reader to interpret before it gets kind of just a bit annoying? And we don't want to like lose faith as well in the writer for doing this. We want to believe that they still know everything that's going on. And I think because it was my first novel too, sometimes I worry I didn't get the balance quite right, but I also still stand by my ambiguity in the book.
Thank you. I think we had committed 40 minutes of a dialogue, and then we thought we'll open it for the audience. Now it's time for audience, if there are any questions to the author about any of the topics that we had discussed, about her writing experience, anything, it's open for the audience. Any questions? I think, okay, there's one there.
Hi, ma'am. Why did you think of three girls? Because ladies are less privileged. Can't your characters be boys?
I'm sorry, can you
Can't
repeat
your
the question?
characters be boys? Why did you choose three girls? Why didn't you go with...
I was very interested in sisters, and I think there's something about that bond between sisters that's so primal and so loving, but also they can kind of hurt each other in a way that nobody else can. And they've also grown up together on this island, and they haven't known anything of the outside world. But they've kind of had very different experiences of their life on the island. So we get the perspective of the older sister and also the middle sister. Mainly we get the perspective of the middle sister, but we also get the perspective of the older sister later on in the novel, which kind of really recontextualizes what we've been told by the middle sister. And we also get sections where all three of the sisters speak together as one in a chorus. So we kind of then see the collective experience too. And yeah, so exploring kind of these bonds which are so close and the experience they have which is so close as well and so entwined, but at the same time is completely different, if that makes sense. And also, like, I have a sister. I've always loved writing about sisterhood too. Like we're very close, but we've definitely had times when we've kind of been each other's worst enemy. I think it's a relationship that's underexplored in fiction, and I've always loved reading about it too.
Sorry to ask you this question.
Yeah.
Did you have any gender bias when you are growing up?
Sorry?
Gender bias while you
Gender
grew up.
bias.
What?
You mean like again, like in like family or?
Something which you had experienced in your personal
Oh,
space or
yeah.
professional space.
I think as a writer, I haven't experienced it. I feel like it's kind of been, yeah, maybe kind of in some aspects of my life, for sure. But yeah, kind of, yeah, I guess kind of in like more personal life and stuff, I guess. But yeah, I've been lucky for sure as a writer to have had a really good experience.
Because being in India and Kerala, we go through it day by day, day, day and night. The gender bias and how we ladies are treated here. Being a foreigner, I thought you may be having a different experience.
Yeah, no, I know for sure I've had a different experience. Yeah. But I think as well it's, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah. Up there.
Hello.
Hi.
I just. Hello. Yeah. I just wanted. Yeah. So. Hi, I just wanted to ask you what are the tips that you would be giving for a young writer or aspiring writer who's planning to move to the UK, like, who's starting a career? Would it be a good idea to move to the UK to start a writing career?
To move to the UK to start a writing career? I guess it depends, like whether you were coming for a course. I mean, I love the UK. I've had a really lovely time writing here, but I think you can be a writer anywhere. You know, I think that's one of the things I really love about writing is you can literally just do it wherever, and it feels quite like a democratic process because you just need a laptop, a pen, anything, and you can do it from anywhere. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily to move to the UK. I think it's just necessary to like be with yourself and to just sort of, yeah, write as much as you can. That would be my main tip. Thank you.
For those Malayali audience, those of you who watched this movie, Vaishali, you would find the same context there, right? So, again, if I try to contextualize it, there are themes of isolation and purity over there too, where if in this case, if it's a family, in the case of this noble, in the movie, or in the narrative of the story, it's done by a sage having a power and control and authority over a whole family. There is control and authority figures there. There is gender dynamics there. There is patriarchy, fragility of safety. If you go beyond the point, you become impure. So there are multiple ways in which you could interpret this book. If you kind of introspect on what is being written and what is a context in which it is written. I mean, I normally begin my classes saying there are three ways in which you can approach academics. One is the content, second is the concept, and then if you go deeper, it is the context in which you apply it. So I find the content, the concept of whatever she had, wanted to bring in, has been beautifully contextualized in this, and that's what makes this book quite a compelling read. And I would suggest and recommend those of you who are having an interest buying this book. This book is available. The signed copy can be bought from the bookstore here. We would invite, still we have another 5 to 10 minutes for one or two more questions, which I hope you would be happy to answer.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Any more questions on the idea of gender? Yes, we have one.
Good evening to both of you.
Hi.
As far as my understanding is concerned, this book is about toxicity, patriarchy. So, have you explored the economic factors related to this in this book?
Yeah, I haven't explored the economic factors in the book. I think because it's such a kind of insular portrait of a family. First and foremost, it is about a family, and the world of the novel is so small. It's just literally the three sisters and the mother and the father, and kind of part of the claustrophobia, I think, of the novel, because it's quite a claustrophobic novel, is the sense of we don't actually know what's happening on the outside world. We don't know how much is true and how much has been told to the girls in order to sort of control them and to keep them basically on the island, away from everywhere else. So there's kind of actually not an exploration of the wider world at all. It's more about the kind of the impact. And sometimes, I think I'd like to kind of go back to it and think about that world in a more realized way, because I know when we kind of are reading a book that is dystopian or something, it is satisfying to have more answers about what has brought the world to this place. But I think for me, for the purpose of the narrative, it was just really important to focus on the family, for us to have about as much information about everything going on as the sisters themselves. So it feels very isolated. We are kind of, in the dark as much as they are, but with the knowledge, I guess, that from the world we're reading, the knowledge of their world is not quite right, and there's something happening there.
We still have time for one or two more questions. So in a nutshell, we began this conversation talking about helicopter parenting and how the hovering around of the parents and the rules decided by the parents on behalf of the children, when parents take their decisions and impose it, how the power structures create patriarchal, especially when it's addressing women, in the creation of a patriarchal society. And then we started this discussion on the various kind of context in which you could place this book, whether it's in a family, within a corporate, or in a geopolitical context, or it can be several other interpretations too. And I was even trying to give a gist of how I look at it, comparing the movie Vaishali, which is a Malayalam movie, and I found the resemblance of a lot of themes, a lot of concepts that you've tried to explore. But if I may summarize, because as I said, I'm totally from a different domain, but this book made me, read because of its narrative, because of its writing style. And I was trying to kind of summarize this book, and some of my key takeaways are the the fragility of safety. When the novel highlights how the pursuit of absolute safety can become a form of oppression too, and the sisters' isolation is meant to protect them, but it also traps them and disempowers them. That's number one. Number two, the complexity of gender relations. Mackintosh, critiques both the overt and the subtle forms of gendered violence while exploring how women navigate through these oppressive systems. That's number two as a takeaway for me as a reader. Number three, the impact of trauma, how much traumatic it becomes, the early childhood experiences and what you experience thereafter. It's shown as something that wraps perceptions, it influences your relationships, and the reality itself. And it gets reflected in the sisters' behavior throughout this novel. Number four is the ambiguity as a strength. The novel's refusal to provide a clear answer or resolution mirrors the society in itself. It mirrors the complexities of how the society is structured, encouraging the readers to engage deeply with these themes in whatever ways possible. And number five is the duality of isolation. I mean, these are some of my key takeaways. It can be both a sanctuary and even a prison. The novel questions whether one can truly escape external dangers without losing the essence of the human connections. So I feel much of this novel's power lies in what is left unsaid. A lot of things one has to interpret, and that's the possibility of this novel. That's the possibility of Sophie's writing and her writing style. It's a masterful exploration, at least for me as a reader, of power, fear, and survival. It's apocalyptic prose and layered themes. There are multiple layers which one could decode, making it a compelling read. It's as much as a psychological journey as a narrative about the societal constructs, making it a must read. So I once again urge those of you who have found interest after having this conversation or after listening to our little conversation about this book, the book is available in the bookstore. Please do buy a copy, and Sophie is here to sign your copies. Any closing remarks before we conclude? Is there any closing remarks?
Just that it's, I wrote this book wait, what year are we in? I wrote this book 8 years ago now, which seems, a really long time for me, and I feel a lot has changed in those 8 years, and depressingly, a lot has sort of remained the same as well, especially with kind of history repeating itself with Trump's re-election. Not a sentence I ever hoped to say necessarily, but again, it's that sense of these are still issues which I think are prevalent in the world. These kind of questions of, but not even just the questions of patriarchy, but also these questions of, I guess, interpersonal relationships and control, and like you said, the kind of the potential of power to be really corrupting in the sense of a unit which is closed off from the world. And it's also very nice to return to this first book too, because it was a book that changed my life really and kicked off my career as a novelist, and I feel it's brought me here 8 years later to beautiful Kerala, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here for the event, and for everyone for having me here in the first place too, and for you for interviewing me. Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Kayla, for this opportunity. Thank you, audience, for being so patient and kind to us. Thank you.